This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sirr.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show.
We're very much looking forward to chatting to poet John McAuliffe about his selected poems. But first of all, we haven't talked to each other for a while about books that we've been reading and literary news that's been catching our attention recently. So, Enda, is there anything that you have been enjoying lately?
Yeah, it is great to have a chat, I think, Peter. We haven't done it in quite a while, actually, about things that, we've been enjoying reading. And I'd like to give a shout out to this beautiful book which arrived from Sirr Nichonal, Arts Officer for Lynch County Council. You can see me holding it up there, Peter. Many thanks to Myrn for sending it on. It's called In Trust, in Gratitude, in Hope. And it's a publication which accompanies the 10th anniversary exhibition of the same name at the Lynch Art House. 64 artists in total. They're associated with the Lynch Art House since its establishment 10 years ago. They took up the call and they responded to the final line of the poem Window Seat by Pat Bourne, which was especially commissioned for the occasion. In Trust, in Gratitude, in Hope. And it's a fantastic book. It's really quite an outstanding selection of artworks at the Lynch Art House. And I just want to say as well that they're all available for visitors to go in and engage with over the coming months, curated by Monica Flynn. There's work by Martin Gale, Alice Marr, Nick Miller, Rita Duffy, to name some of the artists. And there's a multitude of art forms as well. There's painting, textiles, sculpture, photography, film, all available now for the public to see. And as a book and an exhibition, I think it kind of renews our faith in the whole creative process. And I really love that they've responded to a poem. It's so nice, I think, when there's a collaborative quality to a project, isn't it, Peter?
Sure is. But I see you got another book in your hand too. It looks like a novel. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I think sometimes it's just great just to read something that you've never read before. And a writer that I'd heard absolutely fantastic praises about is the writer Paul Lynch. And Philip Morris said it's a brilliant hypnotic book, this book, The Black Snow. And I love kind of precise but poetic prose. And I know I've spoken before on this podcast about Eugene McCabe's Death and Nightingales, set in Fermanagh in 1883, a masterful novel of this kind of calibre, poetic prose. And it's not a novel that you'd easily forget. And I think The Black Snow by Paul Lynch is another novel that I've been recently reading that you would not forget, Peter. It's impressive. It's a moving achievement. He's thematically diverse as a novelist. He's a gifted writer. His books to date include Red Sky in the Morning, Grace, which won the Kerry Group Novel of the Year award. And another beautiful novel, Beyond the Sea, is one that I'd really like to read as well. But of Black Snow, the novel that I'm holding up here, the American writer Ron Rash, who I really like as well, he said it's a dark, mesmerising study in obsession, despair and secrets held for too long. So it's the kind of book that I really like, secrets held for too long. I immediately want to read it and see what are the secrets, what's going on in this book.
So tell us something about The Black Snow then. I mean, what period of time is it set in, first of all?
Well, it's set in 1945, which I kind of was a relief for me, actually, to leave the contemporary world and to go back in time. And it opens in a farm in Donegal. The farm owner is a man called Barnabas Kane. What a brilliant name. And he's moved to Donegal from America with his wife Eskra. She herself was born from Tyrone folk who'd taken the boat to New York years before. And Barnabas and her, they met in New York and they returned to the county of Donegal to set up a new life with their son Billy when he was young. But when the book starts, he's now a teenager.
At the starting point of this novel, it's a fire that starts up in the byre, isn't that right?
Yeah, it's quite a slow start, but there is drama there. A fire starts up and Matthew Peoples, who's Barnabas's farmhand, they both run across the fields towards the fire. They're trying to save the cattle that are in there. And actually, I was just thinking I could read a short little piece, Peter, for you, just to give a sense of his writing, because his writing style is absolutely brilliant. We came upon the pasture field, and what we saw was a helix of black smoke that hid the house, spread like squid ink in water. The west end of the byre's roof was blazing. Smoke sidled from its windows like water streaming backwards over rocks, curled towards the roof, where it made with darker smoke a sickening union. He ran into the yard and saw Matthew Peoples working the long handle of the pump, the huge tree arms on him. A bucket slung over the pump's snout and water sloshing in. Matthew Peoples turned with his face lit as if by rage, and he began at a run towards the fire, swung the bucket back and pitched into the air a river. The water travelled for a moment, glittering and strangely beautiful, until it fell dimly upon the roof like a stone met with an ocean. Barnabas ran to him, grabbed at his shoulder. "Fuck that," he said. He pulled him by the arm and pointed. They ran to the bar's double doors and stood facing them, a wrath of smoke slide through the cracks as if the fire were but a small thing.
And of course, this fire has big consequences, isn't that right?
Yeah, the fire is catastrophic for Barnabas, not just financially, but also emotionally. And to give too much away about it, but a huge catastrophe happens, and there's suspicion in the community, there's the disintegration of the marriage, the financial fallout that happens to Barnabas's family, and any effort he makes to get himself back on track is scuppered by the ill will of the community. So it's quite a dense and dark novel.
What is it that makes it kind of work best or stand out for you in particular, Enda?
Well, for me, Peter, I think that's a good question. And you could hear there the prose that I was reading out. It's all in Paul Lynch's storytelling, which is the stuff of tragedy, but it's also his use of language. For me, it's so distinctive and it's so finely made. Actually, I have to admit that when I began the book, the first few pages, I read them a few times again and again and again, because I just found the writing so beautiful. And like Eugene McCabe, who I spoke about earlier, Paul Lynch is nuanced. He's daring the way he reinvents the rural novel through language that is richly textured. It's layered. It's so precise. And the words he writes have a great beauty. And I actually felt that they had the heft of poetry about them too. This is a haunting novel. It's about violence and horror, but it's also about love and its destruction within a marriage and a family. It's a really fine book. So I'm looking forward to reading the rest of his novels. It's great to discover a writer like that, I think, that you suddenly think, this is great. I really enjoy it.
Indeed. So that was Enda talking about In Trust, In Gratitude, In Hope, 10 years at the Lynch Art House, and also Paul Lynch's novel, The Black Snow, published by Quercus. And as usual, all details are available on www.booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com.
Today's imperative, after Horace, Ode 1:7. Others have herb life, bogland, the bird sanctuary, or man-made canals and urban decay. And they have international flights of fancy too. But wherever they go, it all looks and sounds the same to me. Mountains, some work, a nice sunrise that none of the other tourists sees, or an epiphany that signals a deeper engagement with the local patois, native literature. Then there are the Argonauts who labour in the interstices of a language or two at most, and that crowd whose ambition is to introduce gender to the reader who hasn't got one on him. Long warm-ups, agreed movements from A to B, and put up the shutters with a lyrical turn, or various little-known fabrics and figures, such as you often find in those who use family detail as glitter to stud the rough black rock of their fictions. And I like all this, but it doesn't live in me. It doesn't wake me up in my skin at night. I'd rather sing to you about what's imperative. So listen. Take your mind off the stresses and anxiety of life, and whether you're in a southern town like Cork or Montpellier, or even Washington or Rome, go pour yourself a glass of wine. Now, imagine the kind of man who trusts himself to fortune and says, "Let us go wherever it takes us. We've heard that a better life awaits us, and we've seen worse. Today, banish worry, exile it. The night's young now, and soon we'll be back to the grind. In fact, maybe tomorrow."
Oh, thanks very much. That was John McAuliffe. I think it's a bit early to pour ourselves a glass of wine at the breakfast table. It was really wonderful hearing you reading today's imperative from your selected poems published by Gallery Press in 2021. Well, John McAuliffe was born in 1973. He grew up in Listowel, County Kerry. He studied at NUI Galway and has since 2002 lived in the UK, where he's Professor of Poetry at the Centre for New Writing at the University of Manchester. He has published 5 collections with Gallery Press: A Better Life 2002, which was shortlisted for a Forward Prize, Next Door 2007, and Of All Places 2011, which was a Poetry Book Society recommendation. The Way in 2015 was joint winner of the 2016 Michael Hartnett Award for Best Collection, and the Kabul Olympics. His selected poems was published just last autumn. He curated the Poetry Now Festival in Dunleary Rathdown between 2003 and 2007. And for 3 years, he chaired the Irish Times Poetry Now Award for Best Collection. In 2010, he held a Heimbold Chair in Irish Studies at Villanova University, and he is also Associate Publisher and Editor with Carcanet Press.
And we might go back and talk about that later on, John. And I was just thinking, God, the Poetry Now Festival, I so miss that festival. Where is it? We want it back, you know. But John's poetry is characterized, I think, by its formal skill and inventiveness. It's often kind of very striking images, descriptive brio, and great variety. The poems interrogate domestic life, the meaning of home, the relationship between Ireland and England. And they often deal with the experience of living between both places and navigating that fault line. They reflect a world where global politics intrudes on individual lives, and John McAuliffe, by now recognised as one of the leading poets of his generation, has succeeded in developing a poetry that has room for the Manchester Arena bombing and the tumultuous Brexit debates, as well as the personal and domestic kind of concerns. So it's a line the poems walk with power and eloquence, and we're very glad to welcome you to Books for Breakfast, John, to talk about your selected poems.
Thank you very much, Peter, and lovely to talk to you and to hear all that. I'm full of shame at hearing myself talk about it that way.
Good. It's not. Yeah, it's great to begin with a bit of breakfast embarrassment is always a good thing. And I actually, John, I might start with that poem that you just read. You know, because I'm just interested. I really into where you take that Horace poem. You know, and that notion of a better life, which gives the title to that the book that it appears in, but that notion of kind of living in the moment and banishing worry and exiling it with wine. And I wonder, can you still do that Horatian thing of banishing cares with wine and setting out the next day on boundless seas?
I can, you know, it is one of the I don't know if it's a genetic gift or what it is, but that feeling of being able to enjoy the hour and the day without having to think too much about the year or the future is something that I have somehow, in spite of lots of other competing pressures, managed to retain. I think it's part of writing poems as well. I think it is an escape from your historical moment. So often, as you and Endo both know, that lovely freedom that you get, that you're entering other times when you're writing, and you can somehow access them. So yeah, I do, and I love that in poems. I love it. I think Horace, who I came to via Auden, I think, probably, and then various, even in all the terrible translations of Horace that are out there, you can still feel that pulse of a kind of a celebration of the moment and that wish that I love in his poems.
Indeed, and likewise, and something that I go back to a lot. But I mean, that's obviously that's from your first book, and I mean, those early poems are often very kind of, they're both rooted, but they're also full of really unexpected leaps, I think. The way you'll kind of unlike things get yoked together. I mean, I was thinking of the poem, you know, your father's tinnitus, for instance, and the machine that kind of deals with it is like the kind of interference in a relationship and memories that, you know, that can't be switched off. And, you know, there's domestic life that plays a big part, and you have children's games, disputes with neighbours, love and death and so on. But, you know, it's very various and kind of questing and questioning or self-questioning body of work as you progress from book to book. And I wondered about the task of putting a selected together out of all that. I mean, you know, in one sense, it's a chance for you to see your work whole and decide on what's important to you, what sticks in terms of, you know, theme and approach and so on. But it's also a chance for the reader to get an overview of your work to date. Now, I just wondered, and I know because obviously you're an editor yourself, but was it a daunting or straightforward process? Did it involve any rewriting? Because I know, you know, just looking back at some of the work, I remember seeing differences between work I'd seen in journals or, you know, online. And then I saw a version in the book that was quite different. And I just wondered about that as well.
It is very interesting, Peter, trying to look back on 20 years of writing. And it's a different thing to putting together the individual books. So to kind of start at the end, I did a little bit of like when you're leaving things out, I guess it's a sort of rewriting. And then there were 3 or 4 poems, I think, where I got rid of a little something that I wasn't sure of. But the process of putting the books together and of getting the poems right for the book brings me to the limit of what I can do with poems usually. So there isn't that much reshaping or tinkering. And the very odd thing, I wonder if you feel the same, is when you have the poems done and the books out of the way, you wish for them to have lives of their own rather than to be kind of flustering around them and trying to interfere with the life that they might have. And I always have this very, very strong sense as well that the poems, my intentions for them, and my understanding of what they've done changes over the years. You know, so that for example, when I got stuck, I suppose, for a while when I was in my kind of late 20s, when I was trying to write my second book. I was living in London, trying to find work and do different things to get by. And I found my poems were just getting shorter and shorter. And our children were really small. They were up really early. I was exhausted. I had less and less time to do the work. And I can remember just trying to think, this is a real issue. And I suddenly realized that I had to absorb what was happening to me in terms of their lives and my life as a parent into the poems, because it was so substantially massive a part of my life at that point. And at the time I thought, I was writing poems about children, but actually thinking about time as a parent introduces anxieties and morbidities and a sense of being mortal. So these poems that I thought were celebratory about children seem to me now to be edged blackly and bleakly with a sense of time, which I just didn't notice didn't notice then. So I did leave the poems alone for the most part. And I think that my understanding of what the poems do will be very different to how other readers pick up on them. And I'm very happy with that. I try to step away from them and always be thinking about the next poem. So in that sense, doing the selected poems was a little bit daunting, having to read back and think about, weirdly trying to remember my attitudes towards the poems as I wrote them, opposed to being, 5 books the other side of them as well.
It is interesting because, I mean, there are poets who will go back and kind of tinker and kind of rewrite their younger selves. I think Derek Mann's a classic example who regarded himself as writing the one book that his life kind of represented and felt free at, whatever age to go back and rewrite what he was doing in his 20s. And I always sort of resist that. I think, oh, please,
I guess we still have the other poems, don't we? Sorry, I guess we still have the other poems, don't we, of his as well?
That's the thing. That's the thing.
So
yeah, that's the thing. John, so I was going to say, because you grew up in a stole, and it's a place that's left its mark on your work, and it's a place obviously you still return to, and the town, the river, the silvery dark, the co-op in the distance humming its bottom line, and the famous Listowel Arms, of course, where we've all been and drunk too much, and obviously it's a famously literary town. And I was just wondering, did any part of that literary heritage or activity have an influence on your becoming a poet? And what is that kind of draws you back to Listowel physically and imaginatively?
I moved to Listowel when I was 11, and my father worked in the bank, so we moved towns quite a bit. And you know that life, Peter, yourself as well.
Yes.
And when I arrived in Listowel, I was a reader. I was a kind of a studious, read a lot of, my mother was a great reader, and my father too. So a lot of books in the house. And when I got to Listowel, there was a great library, and there was a sense that writing was an ordinary activity. And that has always stuck with me. And I think it's really quite unusual. John B. and his son Billy, who is a friend of mine, were just downtown. I'd see Brian McMahon walking around town as well. He was retired as the school principal by that point, but I went to the primary school, so there were just memories of and the actual seeing writers around the place in a very ordinary way. And it wasn't Writers' Week so much as just the fact that writing, like when I was at school, we were all, and again, it's a market town. And Ireland in the 1980s was very depressed economically. The idea of the church, and there was still a very kind of grim moral environment around the body and things like that as well. So for a teenager to grow up in that environment, there were lots of things that could be done. And of course we formed terrible punk bands, but we also tried to write plays and tried to write, and it was there was a lot of ordinary writerly activity going on in the town, and I think that's really shaping. So that I've always tried to think of how poetry is in conversation with the other ordinary activities of modern life. The other thing I should say about Listowel is that it's the home of Kerry Co-op. It's a big factory town. It's got this weird stock exchange element in terms of the little bits of wealth which are around the town. So it's really, it's one of like Declan Kybert's thing about modernity in Ireland and the weird modernness of even the fringes of different parts of Ireland. So Listowel felt very much in touch with modernity to me as well. And when I go back there now, as I do every summer, and in between times, if I can, my family are still in the town, and I've lots of friends that I love to see there. And so it's got a great bookshop now in the middle of town as well. So, it's still the town that I knew. It's changed. It's so much more prosperous in many ways. But a lot of the things that were really important and shaped me growing up, the idea that writing mattered, that all of the kind of rage and disappointments and things like that had places to go in art, are still there in the town, I think.
Yeah, what a great place to grow up. I'm getting a bit jealous here listening to you. But I'm thinking as well, just listening to you as well, that the poems seem to move back and forth between England and Ireland. You're a poet of Manchester as well as of Ireland. And I'm reminded of the central sequence in The Way In, where you tour England and Ireland. And does that sense of occupying two, really in a way quite different realities, stimulate you as a poet?
Yeah, it really does. And first of all, I love travel writing. It's one of these things that I've always liked. I've liked writers that can take me to other places. So in that sequence, I was trying to kind of do a tour in the way that the sort of used to be done by travel writers. And in those books, say tours of Ireland that were written by German or American or British writers, you definitely learned more about Germany, the US, or England than you did about the Ireland they were visiting. So that sense of projection is where you're learning about two places in them. And living in the UK since 2002, in other words, after the Good Friday Agreement and until Brexit, was a very peculiar moment for Ireland and Britain, where there was it was very easy for me to be Irish in the UK in that period, I think, and their travel, because of ferries and the flights, were so much cheaper. So my experience of living away and being able to travel home all the time was very, very different from what has existed at any previous time in history. And since Brexit and the pandemic, anytime afterwards. So it was actually being able to live in two places at once, to be able to be emotionally involved with the north of England and with Manchester, and then with Kerry and with Ireland and with Dublin. It was terrific. My idea is that they were in conversation with one another always and could be mixed across, rather than being in opposition. And I did feel like there's a generation of us who sort of have been over and back like that, who had a different take on that relationship because of the way things could be adjacent rather than crossed in how we wrote about place and how we wrote about travel. So
it gives a great variety to your life, really, doesn't it, John? And you can live in both places but seamlessly. I had studied in England 10 years previously to that, and it was very different. So it was great that, as you say, you arrived at a good time. But we'd love to hear another poem from you, actually, John. Now, I think you're going to read On Earth, and I was just wondering, do you want to say anything about it before you lead us into it?
So this poem, On Earth, has a couple of references in it. One is to the movie, Richard Linklater's movie Boyhood, which comes up. And of course, it's a handy title for me in terms of what the poem is doing, as well as being a great kind of life documentary style approach to living, in a way that I'm very interested in the poems anyway. And I like his poetics. So I was very happy to sneak that in. And then there's a word later in the poem called petrichor, which is that scent, which Irish and Manchester people know very, very well, that smell of rain drying off of stone, and that very particular
I had to look that up, John.
That we know. So here's the poem.
I had to.
Oh. Well, it's the smell we know, if not the word for it. I can remember finding the word.
That's
and going,
it. It's like, what a great, no, exactly. I was thinking, what a great word. And even because I wrote that the smell accompanying rain after a long warm period. There you go. Great word. Yeah.
On Earth. At the bus stop under the horse chestnut, we tally the length of boyhood against the babysitter's plans for later, and, waiting, see the leaves have started to wilt. Brown at their July edges, losing a little of spring's climb upward. Afterwards, emerged from the dark into a thunderstorm, we see out the trees arching welcome to spikes of lightning, its base flooding, growing into reduced circumstances, swelling up, but still about. Is this what it means to be someone? I'm not saying anything, but 24 hours later, the smell in the air is of rain drying off stone. Petrichor, the trees' slow and seasonal evaporation. A way of answering to a day, to years of them, that we step into and speak up for, to you. There is no one else I am talking to.
Thanks, John. I have to say I find that a fascinating poem because it's actually there's two poems in that 2015 collection, The Way In and Cold on Earth. And I thought that was interesting in itself, because maybe they're two takes on the same kind of moment. And in that one that you've just read, I mean, you present a very typical kind of domestic scene, but you do it with very kind of characteristic, forensic detail. And then you get from describing the tree in a thunderstorm to suddenly this kind of, is this what it means to be someone? And it's kind of, as a reader, it's a surprising kind of jolt in a way. It's a very interesting trajectory, I think, that kind of intense observation, but a way of answering to experience. It seems like, was this an important poem for you?
It was. I guess I love the way poems can surprise you as a writer, where you're just going somewhere and all of a sudden something dawns on you and it becomes a fact in your life. This sense of being rooted in a place, as I feel I am here, doesn't mean that you're not constantly being surprised by things. And in fact, this is something that Maurice Riordan, I remember, saying to me when I first knew Maurice, and he'd been living near Nunhead in South London. And he was saying that he was reminding me of the idea of the poets training in the Irish bardic poets and sleeping during the day and working at night so that they wouldn't be distracted by kind of what's ephemeral and what's fleeting and by changes in the world around them. And there is something when you're in one place long enough, things sink in, what's permanent and what's elemental. And this felt like one of those poems for me where, having been in a long time in a place, I wasn't being distracted by anything. I was trying to think about, what it is to be something more existential, I think. Yeah.
Well, just listening to Peter there, he said the word trajectory, and I was interested in the way in the Kabul Olympics, it has a poem about the Manchester Arena bombing, then leads into a sequence about gun running aided by Libya, and then you're off the coast of Ireland as you're growing up. And is that the way inspiration works for you? It's like nearly a series of sideways shifts. Does it feel like that to you sometimes, John?
It really does. And I love the idea of leaving things unresolved, I guess, and having things side by side. Like, one of the things about living in Manchester is you're living in a city very different to the places that I lived in Ireland when I was there, which were very monocultural. And this city is, there are 200 languages spoken here every day, and there are people from all over the world, and it's, racially very, very mixed in terms of the schools our kids go to, in terms of the students I teach, in terms of my walk and the bus rides and the cycling or whatever that I would do around the city. And so trying to find a way to bring that into the Kabul Olympics is really important to me. And the Libyan community in Manchester is there's a lot of people from around near here where I live in South Manchester. But also it just reminded me so much of that weird Libyan presence in Ireland in the 80s and the gun running and Gaddafi's people coming in. And for me to be able to identify a way to draw what I knew as a child into what I see around me in terms of thinking about race and globalization and migration was really, I just found it really fascinating. And then trying to think, I suppose the other big change, just to go back, is going back to, to North Kerry, which has elected a Sinn Féin TD for most of the time that I've been away, which again is just such a shock to me always. As somebody who's gone away, I've never gotten used to. That's a part of the culture that has completely changed since I have left. But then trying to think about the way that gun running and the way that Libyan thing got absorbed in a way that's not all negative, and there's a sort of it's not rejected, it's part of the story, but it's not the whole story about those men, I guess, in a way that I'm just, as a stranger to it, that I'm very interested in, and trying to loop that into what's happening around here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because also something else that strikes me is that by the time we get to the Kabul Olympics, that book, I mean, something's changed, I think, in your work, in a sense that, and you said it at one point, the relatively carefree day-to-day life and travel of the 21st century immigrant life in the UK had begun to seem more fragile, and you alluded to that, in fact, earlier. And I was just wondering, the poems kind of here are reflecting that unease. You talk about their sense of being on the edge of a different and not necessarily better world?
Well, haven't we all felt that? It can't, maybe it is just being here at this point, but it has been a very strange last 5 years, the 5 years in which Kabul Olympics those poems were being written and drafted. Things changed around me and around my life in a way that you just realize how much at the mercy you are of historical forces that are completely beyond you. And I definitely lived, I think, in a little bit of a fool's paradise in my sense of the moment. I still cherish those moments and those hours, but I'm much more conscious of how little control I have over their occurring. So Brexit was one thing, clearly. And then I guess, what climate and climate refugees are doing how they're changing Europe as well, and how Europe is responding to that. So there are lots of terrible changes, and the stories of our kind of, the West's involvement in Afghanistan and things like that, and how that comes home inevitably to us in our daily lives.
And I'm very interested in the way, the way that comes into the title poem as well. I find that it's an elegy for your friend, Caroline Chisholm, and you imagine her imagined world in a way. So it's a poem, but also about art in a way. And I was wondering, might you lead us into that and then perhaps read it for us?
Sure. Well, Caroline was a novelist, and I guess that I was really, she was almost there with her, it would have been her second book that she was working on with me, but her first novel was thereabouts as well. And it was drawing on her own experience and working in Kabul and working for charities. But the frailty of the imagined world and the lost futures, Mahan's phrase, but that sense that there are ways of imagining things which disappear really struck me when you just meet somebody like that, an artist in their prime whose illness all of a sudden just meant that she was not going to be able to finish these projects or make them part of the conversation. And it does, as a writer, you do feel that, don't you, that sense of other people's imagined visions of the world and how tenuous they are and how hard it can be to support them. So the poem is about that. It's called the Kabul Olympics, which is one of these imagined things that never happened, in memory of Caroline Chisholm. She decided on swimming the channel to think through the chances of a character escaping the camps in Calais. When the weather turned, the organiser had to cancel, but training in the murky Dover water was not all beside the point. Swimming Pool Hill would be the name of the novel. The hill was where a swimming pool had been, built by a Russian dreaming up an Olympics in Kabul before the rise of the Taliban. She lived with story. She added one word to another to make more probable what ought to happen. The unfinished novels were visitations, chances we should take. While she wrote, we listened, friends piling now out of the slow black car. When the weather turned, she knew what it meant. She had terrible look is what she wouldn't say. Her laughter started at the back of her throat and tilted her head. She'd call up after writing her character into the channel. Chances were she couldn't tell from day to day where she'd be living herself. Younger, she rode off on a horse. It was a white horse, seen from an orchard. Her amazed father, diminishing on the border, is unforthcoming on the details. They didn't matter. This isn't a story. That noise is probably the wind. They drained the swimming pool at the top of the hill, a quiet spot to test for innocence. She could hear its dry echo. Something unspoken can be something known. Saying it would be another desperate matter.
Oh, so that's John McAuliffe, and he's reading his poem, The Kabul Olympics. Wonderful elegy for your friend, John. So I was just wondering as well, you do editorial work for Carcanet. What's it like to work as a poetry editor, and does it affect your own creative work?
Because I worked as a reviewer for so many years, and it's a little bit like that. There's a pressure that I'm so aware of how many other voices there are out there that I find it quite committing to my own work, because I sort of see how important, it makes me concentrate more on what I'm doing and to make sure that what I'm doing is aware of what other people are doing well, and to avoid repetition if I can at all, as best I can. So that's one element of doing the editing work alongside, and the reviewing work and things like that, and teaching, where you're trying to carve out the space for your own work, knowing the pressures of all the other voices around them. But working at Carcanet has been it's just very exciting. You know, we took in 500 manuscripts last June for an open submission window, and spent a long time with them, and have found, you know, some books from that, which we'll be publishing over the next couple of years. And it's just a pure pleasure working with poets on their poems. Almost always a pure pleasure, you know.
Can you imagine this house, John, two of us in here. God help us. But 500 manuscripts is an awful lot, isn't it? Yeah, terrifying.
Yeah, that was terrifying, I must say. At that point, it's very hard to keep your concentration and make sure you're doing justice to the work of the people who've sent it in. But there is an understanding of how much poetry is being written and how few books are going to be published by a press like, you know, by an independent poetry press. So yeah, there's that. Yeah. But then, you know, we're working with Padraig Regan on their first book, Some Integrity, last year. That was really, really terrific. And to see that book come out last month, I was very excited by it. So it's very, very pleasing work to see it going through the process and going out into the world.
Yeah, it's very celebratory as well. And it was great to see Victoria Kennefic do so well as well.
Oh my God, yeah. It's been so brilliant working with Victoria. Like, that was the first book that I commissioned and took on and edited at Carcanet. And I was so, you know, and it's had the kind of fair wind behind it and the sort of success and readership that you just want for all of your books, really. It's great.
And of course, we had Victoria on this as well. So anybody curious about Victoria again should go back and listen to our interview with her. So.
No, I was just actually going to ask you as well, John. Are you writing new poems? What's going on with you yourself creatively?
Yeah, I am. So, like, you know, I don't know. I'm writing away. I'm writing the selected poems. This is a little bit of a pivot point because you are reflecting on what you've done and you're sort of conscious of it makes you a little bit more conscious of how your process works. So that helped me to bring into focus some new work that I'm doing, and always reading and always trying to absorb what I'm reading into what I'm writing as well.
I think it is a strange time when you bring out your selected. When that happened to me as well, you feel very strange because you've gone backwards and suddenly you have to shoot forward. So it's a peculiar time, isn't it, John?
It certainly is. It certainly is. And life changes all around us all the time as well. Our children are 20, 18 and 14 now. So actually there's a little bit more time again as well. You know, these are different. So
you can kick them out. You get to kick at these two of them out now, is it?
I could say,
who knows?
There you go.
He mightn't want to, Peter.
He mightn't want to. Yeah. I can't imagine kicking R1 out either. But listen, John, you talked about reading there, and I thought it's now maybe it's time to move you to the terrifying toaster challenge, where we ask a guest to talk about, you know, a book that they love or that resonates with them for as long as it takes to make a slice of toast. And you've chosen something I think very interesting.
So I'll get the bread ready then, Peter, and put it in the toaster. Okay, John, are you ready? We're going to count you in 1, 2, 3, and off you go.
So the book I've chosen for the Toaster Challenge is In the Same Light by Wong. And it's a book just out of 200 poems from the Tang era in China. I've always loved these poems. And one of the first poets I loved when I was starting to read poetry seriously was Ezra Pound, for his Chinese poems and the kind of very unusual rhythms that he brought into English through that work. And Wong Mei is really, really interested in what Pound did and what she can do differently when she's translating these amazing poets, Po Chu-yi, Tu Fu, and others and Li Po, who you'll know from other translations. So Wong Mei is a Dublin-based poet. She published 3 books in the late 60s and early 70s in the US with Harcourt Brace. Her mother was a poet. She herself grew up in Singapore, but she moved to Dublin in 1974, and she had published another book in the US about 6 or 7 years ago. And when I came across her, I sort of was surprised I hadn't known her. So I contacted her through her husband, who had an email online, and we struck up a conversation about the work that she'd been doing. And she had literally just finished doing this translation of the Tang poets, or finished a draft of them. So we started talking about the book, and it is, as I say, just out. And the poems have an amazing poise, and they have a sense of space on the page, which I just love. They don't have that forward momentum towards a beginning, a middle, and an end, which I think we're very used to, even in other translations of these poems. And I thought I would read the last poem in the book, which is an anonymous poem, and which used the phrase which was discovered, inscribed on a piece of pottery, I think, and which he uses for the poem. So this poem is Anon, and it's got this amazing sense of time and space, which I love. I was not when you were. I was when you were old. You do not regret that I was born, but I was born late, and you not yet young. Tell me, do I regret my time before you, or any place I would rather be? I would have loved to see you daily, where I lived this side of the sky, and you thereafter across the sea on the horn of some promontory. Long before you were you, I was. I couldn't wait to know you. I go early to arrive yesterday, as butterflies and moths. We were also unborn to be in pursuit of lost flowers. Nights on the scent of leaves. Ceaseless. Forgive.
That's great, John. I have to say, I'm really trying, because I love Tang Dynasty poems, and I love the poets that you mentioned. In fact, it's funny because I was just in the we were both in the Chester Beatty recently. We're looking at art by Chen Zhongzhen, who kind of does this kind of micro art that you have to look through a micro or a magnifying glass. But one of the things he did was he carved 2 Tang Dynasty poems on a single strand of his wife's hair. I had been thinking of these poems, and to think of and to realize, I didn't realize that Wong Mei lived in Dublin. So that's very, very interesting as well. And I think this sounds like a great book. This sounds like a book we have to get. That was in the same light, 200 Tang poems for our century by Wong Mei, and it's published. It's out. It's available from Carcanet now. Is that right? There we go.
That's right. Yeah.
So I'll certainly be trying to get a hold of that. And that was John McAuliffe talking also about his selected poems published by the Gallery Press just last autumn.
As usual, all details will be available on www.booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. John, thanks a million for coming in. It was great to have you.
Thank you both very much. You're very good to have had me on, and a pleasure talking to you. I hope I'll see you over there at some point before long.
That would be lovely. I think we've reached the end of our Books for Breakfast podcast this morning. I'm definitely rushing off to have more coffee. And I'm Enda Wiley, and I have Peter Sirr here with me. And Peter, would you like to tell everyone about the details of the podcast if they'd like to listen again?
Well, you can subscribe at all the usual sources, Google and Apple and so on. And if you want to check out the notes that go along with this podcast, you can go to booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And yeah, so
we'll be back again. We'll have the toast on, we'll have the kettle boiling, we will have more books to discuss, and we're looking forward to having you here.